Welcome to Conservation Fridays. Today, I will be presenting on some of the Berry Conservation District's natural shoreline projects. My name is Rachel Frantz, and I am a certified natural shoreline contractor with the district. So a quick overview of some of our projects. We have 4 shorelines that I'm going to talk about today. And if you want to learn more about what a natural shoreline is and why it is important, you can check out this video linked above. So here you can see the first site on Thornapple Lake. We have a nice sign installed. This site experiences seasonal flooding, where 2 to 3, it was 3 times this year, the entire site flooded over the road. This can be particularly difficult for new plants. Some of these plants have been in since 2016, but we regularly replant this area to deal with some of the plant die-off due to that flooding, as well as it is very shaded and there is a lot of willow roots growing throughout the property. This site is good. It deters geese. Geese do not like long grasses where predators may hide, so that's one key benefit to a natural shoreline, as well as the shoreline stabilization as far as holding the roots all together, or the soil all together with the long roots, and wildlife habitat, providing blooms in different seasons throughout the season, as well as pollinator sources. This is one of the plants on that site, marsh marigold. This plant is also found other places throughout the park, which makes it a really good addition to the garden because it's already found on site, so we know that it can do well there. This on the right side here is part of the original garden that was planted in 2016, which has been replanted quite a few times now. Over here on the left is the addition that was put in 2021. There are so many plants on this site that I couldn't possibly name them all, but just to name a few that you can see here, the marsh marigold is right there. There are some blue flag irises, as well as some fox sedge. We planted orange coneflower. There's also 2 rows of nodding wild onion that help keep the deer away. The next site is on Wall Lake. This is the private landowner site, installed in 2021. This site replaced where a seawall was. So it was an interesting site to go from having that seawall where there was no biodiversity, it was lawn right up to the seawall, to where now there is, as you can see, a ton of different plants in there. There are coral logs holding the shoreline so that it doesn't kind of fall in while the plants are establishing. As those plants establish, though, the shoreline is able to be maintained just by the root structure. And so the homeowner was telling me when I visited last that the night before I had come, he'd wish I'd been there because there were so many butterflies. He just was absolutely amazed. This site also went through a burn last year, so he completely burned it to the ground and was a little worried that nothing was going to come back. But as you can see, it all came back really wonderfully. It filled in really well. And so there's a variety of plants that are not only for the upland area, but also for the in-water and the water's edge. So that allows kind of a transition zone for things like frogs and turtles, to whereas with a seawall, they can't get up there or down there, whichever way they're trying to go. So this enables them to do that. You can see a dragonfly here. There's lots of different bugs, bees, butterflies, dragonflies, all sorts of different insects that will be found around a native shoreline. But like I said before, one thing you're not going to find is those geese. This particular property was done in a more wild way, where the plants were planted commingled, not really grouped in a certain way, other than the zones with the upland, high water mark, and in the water. Here's another bee on some of that swamp milkweed. I think this is my favorite part, just because we need bees, and native shorelines can help provide that habitat. So moving on to Big Cedar Lake, this is a really cool site because, like I said in the intro there, Big Cedar and Little Cedar are both inland lakes that are already very natural. So we had a bit of a hard time finding a good site because they were already very natural and didn't really need a lot of restoration. But we did find this site that was a very large site, and it had a lot of bare areas leading up to the shoreline, as well as some 2 tracks where the family had driven. So we were able to plant hundreds of shrubs along one side, and then we did a seed mix and shrubs, and then plugs and a seed mix along the actual shoreline. You can see a lot of the white water lily in this, as well as the pickerel weed and some grasses. This site has a lot of wildlife. We saw an eastern hognose snake while we were checking out the site before installation. There were tons of fish. And yeah, there's just a lot of different wildlife at this site. One of the main reasons that this lake was picked for the MGLP grant was that it is the lake itself houses inland cisco, which is a very interesting species that has very specific habitat needs. So through this grant, besides the shoreline restorations, we also did some monitoring. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check out our website, berrycd.org. So there's some blue flag irises here, lots of sedges, and you can see some of the shrubs, the dogwoods, and different things. I really like this site because it is so natural, and it just has a lot to offer as far as wildlife habitat. Even some deer browse. When the deer do browse it, it's not a big deal because there's so much planted there that it's totally sustainable. You can see just really how beautiful and natural this lake is here. So we always recommend shoreline to leave a natural shoreline natural, or if you already have a shoreline that's not natural, to start with a no-mow zone, just to kind of filter some of the pollutants that might be running off your lawn into the lake. And then moving from that to a little bit of bioengineering, where you're adding native plants, depending on your lake orientation and the waves and the fetch and all of that. We might suggest you put in some riprap, which is basically just rocks, to deal with that. There's also core logs, coconut core blankets, which kind of hold the soil in place while the plants establish. Shorelines, just like most native gardens, have a 3-year establishment period, and that just means in the first 3 years, you really want to watch and make sure that your plants are doing okay. So these videos are all something that I do. I check on the shorelines periodically throughout the growing season just to make sure that everything's coming in okay and there's no big issues, no animals coming and pulling plugs, which we've had before, or people. The monarch butterflies obviously love the milkweed. And our final lake is also on Wall, or our final site is also on Wall Lake. This site was installed in October of 2022, so just this last year. Fall plantings are good because it gives the plants the winter to establish their roots a little more. This was a really interesting site. We didn't use the seed mix, so that kind of led to a little bit of a weeds problem. So we've been doing a lot of weeding on this site. A lot of the reeds that were there previously also came back, which really isn't a big issue, but they were not the plants that we put there. So it's just each site is different, and it's really all a learning process when we're putting these in to see, yes, maybe it does have sand, but the other conditions aren't really great for this particular plant. Let's try something else. This particular garden has only a handful of species just to make it a little bit easier for the homeowner. It's also a more designed site where we had a very specific layout, very specific colors and height requirements for this site. They're all under 3 feet tall, so there's no vision issues, from the house or from the lake as far as viewing. There's, like I said, very few species, so we only put technically 2 kinds of grass. We have the blue-eyed grass and then the fox sedge, and then we had a few different forbs: blue lobelia, cardinal flower, turtlehead, wild columbine, And then we had some aquatic plants. We put in the blue flag iris, the pickerel weed, and then some white water lilies, just to make sure that we're really covering all those zones. So in this one, you can see some of the pickerel weed. There's also some other weedies in there, but we don't want to pull all the weeds, just the ones, especially the invasives. So here's some of that cardinal flower. And you can just really see this garden has filled out really well because it had that winter to establish. It didn't have to worry about flowering over the summer because it was just kept in a greenhouse. And so when they came up this spring, it just looked really good. We had no real issues with bare spots. There were a couple of plugs that had been pulled by raccoons or just dislodged from the weather. There was a bit of ice push along the shoreline, which caused a little bit of a sandbank to happen. And there's kind of a blank spot there, but that works out because it's right next to the dock. And now it's still, the lake is very accessible to children or to the homeowners, whoever wants to enter the lake that way. So for some resources, if you're interested in learning more about natural shorelines, you can watch our previously recorded Conservation Fridays video from Julia Kirkwood with the Michigan Natural Shoreline Partnership. These resources listed here are all with the Michigan Natural Shoreline Partnership, but they house a lot of other external resources. It's just kind of a one-stop shop for all that information. So the Michigan Shoreline Stewards Program is something you can use to rate your shoreline property. They have different questions. And then if you have a certain habitat score, you can get a plaque for your shoreline to kind of show off, hey, I'm a shoreline steward and I'm protecting the environment by doing this. And that also helps other people learn about it. They've also got a really cool plants for inland lakes page where you can see in this photo here, they break it down by where in the lake they're planted. And that's a lot to do with the moisture requirement for these plants, but you'll also want to keep in mind the soil type that you have, as well as the sunlight availability, because there are a lot of these plants are full sun, but there are some that can handle part sun or shade areas. And then if you would like to get your own shoreline looked at by a natural shoreline contractor, you can contact myself with the Berry Conservation District, or you can visit the Michigan Natural Shoreline Partnership website and look at their certified natural shoreline contractors. And with that, I can't take any questions, and thank you all so much for coming today. All right, so I have one question from Zach about what was the hardest shoreline to install? I can't say. He asked if it was the Thornapple Lake because it floods. I wasn't there for the initial installation of that lake, of that shoreline. But I would say, going back to dig, that is definitely the most physically challenging site because of all those roots. There's also a lot of rocks in the substrate there, so it's really hard to even get plugs in. So I think that would be, it's a really a good site for more of a seeding sort of activity. Other than that, the other three sites were relatively easy to install, very sandy soils. So the digging was really easy, especially on Big Cedar Lake. It took about half the time that we had anticipated. So we had a really quick plant day and then we got to have lunch and go home and it was great.